On today's Mega News, we are returning to Udon's Mega Man Timelines comics to catch up on all the news happening after I had a chance to sit down and talk to a couple of the writers on the series. And I'm going to share a few exclusives that I've learned from interviewing them. So get ready and let's rock. Welcome back to Mega News. I'm ShadowRock, and as I'm recording this, we find ourselves in the middle of the releases for the Mega Man Timelines comics from Udon. After an unfortunate delay which involved switching from Diamond to a new distributor that pushed the entire series back by a month, Mega Man Timelines, the classic one, finally launched in June. And we've already done a review discussion on that you can find right here on this channel. To give the gist of it, I really liked it. Wasn't perfect, of course. I mean, I wish Torchman got to do more than he actually did. And for the uninitiated, this was a Mega Man 11 story, which involved Mega Man facing off with Blastman and Torchman at the same time, as they were sent by Dr. Wily presumably to get back the double gear system prototype. And even though the game is about 7 years old now, which is crazy to think about, it is technically still the new hotness, like it or not. So it was cool to see a story from that era of Mega Man. Overall, pretty decent and worth the $5 I spent on it. The Udon online store's shipping cost, on the other hand, that's another story, but I digress. I was definitely surprised that even though Udon has advertised these as one-shots, it didn't seem like a one-shot at all because it literally ended on a cliffhanger. So we'll see if that story ever gets an ending. Next up is Mega Man X Timelines, and we have a lot to talk about this specific comic because this is where I got most of my exclusive highlights to share. But story synopsis wise, this is a retelling of the Chill Penguin stage in X1. And before we get too deep in the waters on the story here, I do want to quickly mention the release date, which is, actually this was harder to find than I anticipated, but it seems like the actual release date for X Timelines is July 16th, but depending on where you go, your mileage may vary because my local comic shop says July 23rd. Meanwhile, if you pre-order online through Udon, they say that the comic ships in August. Basically, it may already be out, but definitely check with your local comic shops if or when they will get it in. Hello there, ShadowRock from the future here. During the production of this video, the Protoman himself tipped me off to his tweet where he said the following: "Hot off the comic presses, Udon's Mega Man X Timelines #1 sold so well that we have more cover variants coming. Stay tuned. Coming to your local comic shop Wednesday, July 30th, 2025. Wait, July 30th? Oh god dang it, they delayed it again. Well, thanks for the tip, Daniel. You may have saved my video." When he mentions that X Timelines sold well, I think he's talking about the pre-orders because the comic isn't out yet, but it is very promising to hear that it's already performing so well because, as you know, if these comics sell, that means they can do more of them. And Matt did confirm to me in his interview that they are indeed looking at the sales data for each of the individual Timelines comics to see which ones they may want to pursue in the future. And if you somehow thought that there wasn't enough cover variants already, we're getting 7 additional ones thanks to these good sales. And if you want the full details on these new covers, stay tuned to Daniel's Twitter because he's going to be posting them every day up until San Diego Comic-Con. And apparently some covers, not all of them, but some, will be store exclusives. I'll go ahead and throw up a couple of the cover reveals that have already been announced, but I can't cover all of them, so definitely keep an eye on Daniel and Udon's socials if you want all the details. And yes, X Timelines is now coming out July 30th, so there we go. The comic begins right after X gets back to base after getting his butt handed to him by Vile, and as we see in a preview image, Zero pops in and says, "Hey, we got a situation here." They go to the command room and get the lowdown, and then X and Zero are sent after Chill Penguin. Yes, you heard that right. X and Zero. Which brings me to my first exclusive, and this information comes from my interviews with Daniel Arsenal, the writer of Mega Man X Timelines. He also goes by Proto Man online, as well as Matt Moylan, the writer for the Mega Man ZX Timelines coming up, but he's also the director of publishing for Udon in general. I'll have links in the description if you want to check out those interviews in full, because they are just chock full of information, of everything, just kind of going behind the scenes of the comics. But let's go ahead and get back to X and Zero. So Udon did make a conscious decision to give Zero a lot more screen time in the X1 era. The obvious reason is for fan service, and I don't blame you if you're now worried that Zero is going to steal the show once again from X. But the way they explained it to me, X and Zero go into the stage, and then they split ways right at the beginning. So X is still by himself for 90% of the stage until the very end, where they converge back again to face the boss. And that seems to be the general formula going forward. Hold on, going forward? Wasn't this supposed to be a one-shot too? That's something else I learned. So you guys may know that the Archie comics exists, which does basically Mega Man 1 through 3. Unfortunately, the run stopped after the crossover arcs and before they could get to 4, but nevertheless, that is a lot of classic content. So currently as it stands, Udon's plan is to continue the X series of comics, which would allow them to do something unique from Archie. And, you know, X is still a popular series, so I don't blame them. Something that Daniel said, that he has literal notebooks just chock full of ideas for future X comics. So if it does go forward from here, the idea is we would be seeing the rest of X1 be adapted. Now hold on, I hear you say. If they're doing all of X1 and they already started with Chill Penguin, then what about Central Highway? Well, there may be plans for that to reveal in the future as well. And one of the ideas that Daniel threw out, going back to the X and Zero team up, is that we could have Zero versus Steam Chameleon at some point, while X is doing something else. I threw out the idea that X could fight the mini-boss at the same time, good old Boobas, but we'll see. And bear in mind, this is X1 Zero before he got the Z-Saber, before he got the cool shoulder pads. So he would have a little bit of a different fighting style, mostly using his buster and probably his fists as well. That only brings up the question, would Zero get a special technique from Steam Chameleon, and what could that be? I know that it takes away from X's spotlight that he rightfully deserves, but as an alternate take on the game, it is an interesting what-if scenario, because Zero has never been officially playable in X1 before. But that's still far in the future, and plans can change over time, so let's focus back on the present, with X Timelines number 1. Over the past month, Udon has released a few preview images for us to take a look at. The first one features X and Zero entering the level like I talked about before, and Zero offering cover fire against an approaching Ray-Bit. That's what those bunnies are called. The next preview shot shows X going up against the first Axmax that you encounter in Chill Penguin stage, which highlights something that Daniel told me in our interview. He wanted to include moments like this that just shows what the player would experience while playing through the stage, because the main thing he wanted to hammer home for people is that yes, he is a huge fan of these games and he is a slave to the source material, and we can see that on display here, as the Axmax just takes out each section at a time and X has to try to jump over them. Yeah, it's pretty accurate overall. Next up, in case you were curious if the Dr. Light capsule was going to make an appearance, well, see for yourself. I gotta say, I enjoyed the background work here, along with the special effects of Dr. Light appearing in his hologram form, as well as X's facial expressions, seeing his creator for the first time and forever. Yeah, this is a cool page already. We just need the full context now. The last official preview shows Zero calling X over to the command room to talk about Chill Penguin, and here I want to draw attention to that green biker dude looking fellow in the corner. No, I'm just kidding. Actually, I want to draw your attention to the two navigators up front. And actually, on Twitter, Daniel provided a closer look at these two navigators. which you may remember from Mega Man Maverick Hunter X, the PSP remake for X1. And well, if the main cover didn't clue you in already, this comic takes a huge inspiration from Maverick Hunter X. Daniel says it's because that remake gave them the most source material to work from, and yeah, I can't argue that. But okay, you've seen the pink navigator before at least. The blue one, some say, is unused, but you can find her in the background of the Deus Sigma OVA if you look hard enough. But now, the blue navigator is featured more prominently. Cool, but this next piece of trivia is even better. Because after 19 long years since Maverick Hunter X came out, Daniel has told us that these two navigators are getting official names for the very first time. Wow. The pink-haired Reploid is named Minerva, and the blue-haired Reploid is named Luna. So there you go, Minerva and Luna, your navigators from Maverick Hunter X. It's about time. But wait, there is more, because Daniel shared one more panel preview on his Twitter account, featuring a stare down between X and Chill Penguin. And there's a couple of notes I want to make here. First, the way that Edwin drew X here reminds me a lot of the X4 mugshots, which I think is pretty neat. But more importantly, check out the design on Chill Penguin. And then think back to the cover reveal with the stage select, where they clearly were inspired by Maverick Hunter X for the Maverick designs. Now let's go back to this panel, and you might notice something a little different. Still don't get it? Let's pull up Maverick Hunter X Chill Penguin on the screen. Yeah, no, this panel right here, this is the Super Nintendo Chill Penguin design, the original. So what's going on here? I thought we were going for a Maverick Hunter X adaptation. Well, I can at least clear the air on one thing. This was an intentional change, not an error. As for what caused the change, I think we can figure it out by reading between the lines a bit. It is notable that Capcom has been moving away from the Maverick Hunter X redesigns in recent years, including games like Mega Man X Dive and Teppen, which also opted to use the original Super NES designs. So it's more likely than you think that Capcom themselves requested this change, because they are purposefully keeping any representation of the X1 Mavericks faithful to the original game going forward for the sake of consistency. And honestly, it would explain the delays from July 16th to July 30th as well. Make of that what you will, but yeah, it would appear the Maverick Hunter X redesigns are off the table for the future. However, characters introduced in the remake like Minerva and Luna can still be used. That aside, maybe it's because of the interview making me feel more confident that X is in the right hands, but I gotta say, this is my most anticipated out of the Timelines comics. It seems like it's gonna hit just the right notes for an X fanboy like myself, so I'm excited to get my hands on this one. Stay tuned for our review discussion coming up. Trailing not too far after that is the Mega Man Zero Timelines comic, written by Ian Flynn of Archie Mega Man fame, and the art is by Hanzo Steinbach. Here are a few of the covers that feature Zero striking an awesome pose, along with the X-Guardians and a couple of the other bosses in the background. Cover B by Jeffrey Chamba Cruz is the X-Guardians once again, but it's pretty sick. But probably my favorite cover is cover C, drawn by Hanzo. This depicts an X vs Zero fight. Well, a copy X vs Zero fight, but you do see the original X and Zero in the background, which makes for a very epic shot. Now, you shouldn't take this to mean that this fight will actually be in the comic, because something I learned during the interviews is that when it comes to the comic cover variants, cover A and B is pretty accurate to what's going to be in the story, but when you go beyond that with C and onwards, those covers are just for fun and essentially non-canon. That's why cover C for the X comic featured a X2 and onward Zero, even though it's an X1 story. That was just for fun and wasn't meant to be taken seriously. And thankfully we do have X1 Zero in those preview pages, so that puts those worries to rest. Another cover variant they've been doing for each Timelines comic is a cover by King Biscuit that features the Mega Girls of each of the Mega Man eras. And you can order these online through Udon, but prepare yourself. The classic one is sold out now, but it was $40, and the Zero and X ones are going to be $30 a piece. Oh, and by the way, if you wanted the cover C for Zero, that's $20 that they're charging for that. So clearly, these variants are meant for the most diehard collectors. Alright, as for the story of Zero Timelines, the story synopsis says, lost in a barren wasteland, the heroic Reploid Zero fights on. The world he knows is gone, but a new future is rising, and it needs protection. Enter a dynamic new era of Mega Man history. Okay, pretty basic Zero synopsis, but we may learn more by looking at the official preview pages. And boy are there some dynamic shots for these previews. We know that usually this version of Zero goes crazy with the cool factor, or aura farming as the kids say these days, and these preview pages are no different. The first one has Zero taking out a pantheon of a headshot, with a little Met watching the massacre unfold from the background. Poor guy. Next, another insanely action-packed page with Zero on a sled with a rocket launcher, slicing heads off of pantheons, and man, this is just awesome. The third page has the Guardians reacting to everything going on, and then mobilizing into action, with yet another cool panel. Then our last preview page features Ciel and Alpizo from Zero 2, and it looks like they're building the new resistance base that will be featured in Zero 2. So if you haven't pieced it together already, essentially this comic is Zero 1.5. The events that takes place right after Zero defeats Copy X, and then the real X basically says the future is in your hands, and then Zero begins his marathon fighting waves and waves of enemies until the events of Zero 2 kicks in. What's interesting about this premise is Inti Creates almost made this game at one point. In an interview with US Gamer, Inti Creates president Takua Aizu had this to say: our initial plan was to create a game which was basically Mega Man Zero 1.5, a story between 1 and 2. That was our way of compromising. But Capcom wanted us to create a true Zero 4 instead of 1.5, so we started to rethink things. So yeah, now we're finally going to see at least a snippet of what Mega Man Zero 1.5 could have been in comic form. If it turns out that we only get this one-shot comic from Udon and nothing else, I'm glad that this is the concept that they decided on for Zero. And then there was ZX, which I do know a little bit about thanks to the interview of Matt Moylan, the writer for this, and the art is by Dax Gordon. Oh, by the way, the last time I shared the cover A for this, a lot of people, myself included, were thinking, wow, Vint ain't looking too hot. But since then, they have released a revised version of the cover, which touched up his face at least, and leans more into the anime art style that Mega Man fans typically expect for ZX. I still wouldn't call it perfect, but they tried at least. Next we move on to cover B, and this one's a little interesting to me personally because in my interview with Matt, he told me that cover B would actually reveal the pseudoroid in quotations that would be appearing in the story for the ZX comic. Then we see cover B and it's actually Prometheus and Pandora. Do they count as pseudoroids? I think the proper term is Megamen, but oh well, I guess. This is still a big hint as to what the ZX comic is going to be about. The art here is by Hansel Steinbach, and it's a pretty accurate representation of these characters, so can't complain. My favorite has to be cover C, which is by Andrew Dickman, which features the pets from throughout the Mega Man franchise. Mostly classic representation, but we also have Data from Mega Man Legends here too. And is that a Mega Ball? Yeah, very adorable. As for the story of Mega Man ZX Timelines, here's the synopsis. Centuries in the future, a battle is fought over control of the biometals, living artifacts that contain powerful weapon data. One person stands in the way of the destructive pseudoroids and their hidden master using this power for evil, Vint. a Mega Man with the combined powers of Biometal Z and Biometal X. So if you couldn't tell from the cover already, yes, this is Vint, not Ale. So if they ever do a ZX comic, I guess they would have to go with Ash and all of her booty hunting. The background of cover A also tells us that this is a ZX1 comic because, well, it's the ZX1 Pseudoroids. And as for where exactly in ZX1 it takes place, according to Matt, it's going to be smack dab in the middle of the game, which explains why Prometheus and Pandora are in cover B, because this means that the story is probably going to be about that intermission in the middle of ZX where Prometheus and Pandora infiltrate the base and then you have to go deal with them. So that settles that. The only comic left in the Timeline series that's still up in the air is Legends, which so far we only have the cover A review for, which... never mind. Hello, ShadowRock from the future here once again. We were almost about to tell you to stay tuned for the Legend synopsis and all the cover variants, but just in the nick of time, the solicitation has now come out so we could talk about it. Huzzah! As covered before, Legends Timelines #1 is by David Oxford of the Mega Man Network fame, and the art is by Mick Fong of the Mega Man Dreamwave Comics fame. What a duo! And now without further ado, here's the synopsis. Far in the future, the Digger, known as Mega Man Volnut, has discovered a valuable artifact from the distant past. Could it be the secret to unlocking a long-forgotten technology? The thieving Tron Bond just wants to know, how much is it worth? It's an all-new adventure in the halcyon days. Missed opportunity to include in a world covered by endless water. But all jokes aside, well, the synopsis basically says it all. It doesn't appear to be a retelling of one of the games. It's an all-new story. Although, having played The Great Adventure on 5 Islands recently, the synopsis sounds kinda similar to what happens in that game, where Volna finds some old technology, but the Bonds are only concerned with how much they can sell it for. So obviously they're gonna try to steal it from Mega Man. To be fair, this could probably describe a lot of scenarios in the Legend series, but nevertheless, it's cool to hear that it's gonna be a new story, especially for the people who may have thought that the retellings are kinda boring. New content is always welcome here. Now, let's move on to the variant covers, and oh boy, you're gonna love these. Cover B, which is by Bakun, has Roll and Tron having a catfight. Oh dear. And if we're still going by the rule that Matt mentioned that cover B may or may not be relevant to the actual story, maybe this catfight does happen in the comic, which I'm sure will be very humorous. But also not too surprising considering these ladies have always been at each other's necks in the series. I just love all the expressions from the Surbots in the background. Next up is Variant C by Jeffrey Chamba Cruz, featuring the Bond family in all their glory, looking extra evil this time around, especially Teasel, holy cow. I'm digging it. Last but not least, here's Cover D by Josh Perez, aka Die Mooch, and whoa. No way. No, but it is! It's a Mother Elfin Transformers reference! Oh my god. It's probably a good time to mention that there's a number of people working on these Mega Man comics that are huge Transformers fans, like Daniel, even David, who's writing the Legends comic. And these mad lads have done a parody of the poster for the 1986 Transformers the movie, the greatest piece of animation to bless humankind, and that's not an opinion. And now we have a freaking Mega Man parody of it. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I guess you could say this was inevitable, but it doesn't make it any less incredible. Let's just take a moment to get a good look at this and take it all in. Front and center, we have reps for each of the Robot Timeline Mega Man, Classic, X, Volnut, Ash taking RC's spot. I see what they did there. I also see what they did there replacing Cup with Zero, so it makes sense he's using a pistol instead of a buster. I like the inclusion of some of the antagonists. Vile replacing Galvatron makes almost too much sense. and then the Wily capsule in place of Galvatron's ship, and finally we have to address the giant Met in the sky replacing Unicron, a Metacron if you will, but using the Met's mouth as the opening and all that, it's just immaculate. It's perfect. Guys, can I get this on a poster? Or at least a t-shirt? Please. I will pay money for this. But at the very least, I can try to buy this cover when it does go on sale. Because if there's any variant cover out of all the ones I've seen that I actually want, this is the one. Put your pencils down, everybody. We found the best cover, in my opinion, of course. The last relevant piece of news for the Legends comic is that it is coming to stores on October 22nd. So just to recap, X is coming July 30th, Zero a couple of weeks later in August, ZX in September, and finally Legends on October 22nd. And that will round up the Mega Man Timeline series, for now at least. Phew, that was a lot to get through, but we finally made it to the end of this video. I want to thank you all so much for watching, and stay tuned to ShadowRockZX for all things Mega Man, including the upcoming comics and our reviews for them. Also, definitely check out the interviews in the description if you want to learn even more stuff about the behind the scenes. I'll also leave links for our reviews for Mega Man Timelines number 0 and number 1, as we cover the free comic book day issue as well. Which, by the way, if you missed that one, you can actually order it through Udon's website with an exclusive cover as well. Alright guys, thank you all once again, and until the next one, rock on and have yourselves a great time zone.